I'm a bit of an occultist. This is important later, and I went through a phase as a teenager where I studied almost everything paranormal I could get my hands on. But these days, I'm mostly a skeptic where spectacular creature phenomena are concerned. Or I was, until about 3 days ago. Around that time, I was on a drive and I heard a really old podcast about black-eyed kids. The original internet post from Alabine, and I almost wrecked my truck. The story was so similar to an experience that I had with my boyfriend back in January. But let me tell you about that first, because it's weird in and of itself. I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on a date with my boyfriend. It was actually our first date, despite having met online over a year ago, and being an official couple for 4 months at that point. We decided to drive down to Baton Rouge for the weekend after a college football national championship, so partying was in full swing from the LSU victory to party and hang out in general. Our first night there, we decided to see a movie. I think it might have been the 1917 movie, and we got to the theater about an hour early so we could make sure we got good seats. We got our tickets, and having time to kill, we decided to walk across the street to the Mall of Louisiana and take a quick look around and window shop for our planned outing the next day. It was kind of late, around 7:30 or so most of the shops were closed, but we decided to go to the mall anyway. Like I said, to window shop, and also to walk around and stretch our legs. We had just crossed the street at the crosswalk right there between the theater and the bowling alley and arcade, and it happened. I never saw them walk up, which is odd, because I have a really hyper-focused sense of observation. I grew up in a bad environment, and you learn early to take note of everyone and everything, no matter if you think somebody is a threat or not, just in case. Me and my boyfriend, who is younger than me, and also a slim individual, had just made it to the other side of the street when two boys approached us, seemingly out of nowhere. One looked to be about 16, and the other was about 12 or 13. Both of them were Caucasian in appearance, the older one having either brown or sandy blonde hair, and the younger one with brown hair. It was just light enough outside still to be able to see that much. My first impression was that their clothes were weird. They looked like the kind of Abercrombie and Hollister clothes a typical suburban kid would wear, but from the mid-90s, kind of faded almost. The older boy started talking, and it immediately creeped me out. "Do you have a car?" He just walked up to me and asked that. But I'm a nice guy, and other than the weird feeling that something was off, and despite it being such an odd question, I decided to answer. Bear in mind that at this point, my boyfriend is beside me and slightly behind to my left because he was following me and we had been talking. We had both stopped talking because of how weird we both felt in this situation. This is really hard for me to type. I'm honestly creeped out and scared at the present moment, but I want to put my whole story out there. I looked at my boyfriend, and he had his head down and had moved behind me. I'm a bigger guy because I used to work out heavily before my job took over, and I could tell he was getting behind me because he was scared. And my boyfriend doesn't scare easily. He's never backed down from a fight, and his headstrong nature has gotten him into trouble before. But now he was hiding behind me, and when he saw me looking at him, he raised his head and shook his head no before putting his head back down. He also wasn't on his phone, which was weird because he had just been in the middle of a lively Snapchat conversation moments earlier, that being his preferred social media app. I looked back at the boys, and neither of them had moved. I don't know why I said it, because my first instinct was to lie and get my boyfriend away from there. But I told him, well, not really. I mean, I have a rental. I'm parked over there. I pointed to the movie theater parking lot. Can you give us a ride? Despite the complete sense of uneasiness I had, and the extremely strong sense that they did not need to be anywhere near my car, I was curious. I've been a youth pastor and youth addiction counselor in the past, so when I see a kid in need, my first instinct is always to try and figure out what's going on and how to help. Where do you need to go? We came to the mall, but we need to get back to our house. It's not far from here. Our parents will be mad if we don't get back. Well, why don't you call them? Maybe they can give you a ride." I was headset against giving them a ride, despite their average appearance. I kept getting images of maniacal smiles and throats being slit from behind in the back of my mind. We don't have phones. I have a habit of scanning my surroundings, and I looked up just then to see if the other people milling around were just trying to get past us on the sidewalk, or looking at the strange conversation of young men in the middle of a busy throwaway. But just as I looked up, I heard the younger one say, "They're not paying attention." Heard him say. I never saw him speak, despite having him stand not 3 feet from me, and his face being very much in my field of vision. I also thought he was speaking to his brother. His brother looked at him, and I heard, "They can help us." The younger one looked back at him. "They can see us." I thought this was odd, but I was more concerned with finding a polite end to this conversation and seeing these boys on their way safely. "I really would help you, but there's all kinds of stuff in my back seat, and we have to see a movie soon. It won't take long. It's not far." The older one had spoken and turned to face me again. I barely managed to notice that the rest of the small crowd at the mall looked kind of washed out. Almost not there, really, when I saw his eyes for the first time. They were the palest shade of green. Yes, odd for a black-eyed kid story, but bear with me. His eyes, though I could see them, were kind of ethereal, almost not really there, almost transparent, like ghost eyes. They had bits of yellow in them. Maybe they turned blue. I'm not sure. They were hypnotizing, though. I noticed fear in his eyes. Not, "I'm about to die" fear, but "I need serious help" fear. The fear a kidnapped victim might feel, or a lost kid. He looked at the younger boy again. "Yeah, he can see us. Ask him for help." I was sketched out by now, and I just wanted to leave. "I can't give you a ride, but you said it's not far. Can you walk? Or can I let you use my phone to call your parents?" "They're not at home. They're still at work. It's too far to walk. It's a couple of miles." I was desperate to get away by now. The sense of urgency to help was getting far too strong, and I didn't like it, because every time I thought about helping, I got a stronger sense that I was going to be murdered. I just knew that if I survived the trip there, I would be invited in, and I wouldn't be able to refuse, and their parents would be inside, and it would be bad. My boyfriend wasn't even a thought then, except that he was so close behind me that I could feel his presence. We had to go. "I can maybe give you a couple of dollars for bus fare. There was a bus stop right there." "We just moved here. We don't know the bus stops. We just need a ride." "Where are you from?" "Far away." "Look, I wish I could help you, but we've got to go." And with that, I started to walk away and made sure my boyfriend was with me. We left that spot in a hurry. I turned around about 5 seconds later to look at the two weirdos, and they were gone. My boyfriend was pissed. "I can't believe you did that." "Did what?" "Talk to them." "What? They needed help." "They were messed up." "What, you mean high? Their pupils weren't even dilated." "No, they didn't have any pupils. They were messed up." "I didn't see anything." "I can't believe you didn't see anything. I'm telling you, they were messed up. That's why I didn't say anything, and I'm not crazy. I know what I saw." I believed him, kind of. I thought he meant drugs. I joked with him about it for a few moments, honestly not seeing anything amiss, except for their weird attitude and the insistence of getting in my car, but he got even more upset. "Just stop talking about it. I'm done. I'm not crazy." And so I dropped it, until 3 days ago, when I heard a story about black-eyed kids on an old podcast show I had recently discovered. I called up my boyfriend to ask him, "Those guys at the mall back in January, did they have black eyes?" "Yeah," was all he would say. He was still too scared to talk about it. But looking back, I remember that weekend. It was bad. Me and my boyfriend argued about trivial stuff. We almost broke up. He developed a nosebleed that night after he went to bed. I almost went crazy. I drove across town, full of unexplainable angst, and stopped at one of the riverboat casinos. Out on the promenade, I had this strong urge to throw myself in the Mississippi and drown myself. It was raining, and the water looked rough. I knew I wouldn't survive, but somehow, I held back against the unexplainable urge. In the weeks that followed, he had a near nervous collapse. I was having issues at work that almost cost me my job. We almost broke up again. I had a psychic help me do a cleansing, and things which had slowly begun spiraling into an abyss, especially with virus-related layoffs, started improving. Now, I mentioned to you that I was into the occult, since I'm a pagan. Well, yesterday, I was talking to a witch friend of mine who has a lot of lore knowledge and experience dealing with the paranormal. A lot more than me. I told her my story, and she was not the least bit surprised. Yeah, she told me, they're the spirits of kids who were horribly abused in life. I thought about it and considered the Scandinavian Mylings. Children with black eyes come back for revenge on the living, killed at a young age and denied a proper burial. Then I thought about another black-eyed kid story, where the parents of the kids actually did drive after a lady invited them, which brings me to a second story. I was staying with some friends of mine once, and this was actually about the same time I had met my first boyfriend online. Anyway, they were a couple, and we were all close. I'll just leave it at that. They had a son whom I'll call Robbie, not his real name. Anyway, Robbie was the coolest kid ever. He was 7, got good grades at school, and was fiercely independent. Knew how to cook a little bit, did chores like chopped firewood, and was known to steal alcohol on occasion. Then, he had a side of his personality where all he wanted to do was either snuggle up to me or his mom on the couch and watch a cartoon and fall asleep on the days where it was raining and he did not have school. Mom worked weekends and didn't, and Dad wasn't the affectionate type. And, like I said, we were all close. He called me uncle. Anyways, he was a sweet but tough kid. Well, one time, he started having nightmares and sleepwalking, which is typical 7-year-old kid stuff. No big deal. I don't remember the nightmares because they were eclipsed by something else. The spirit. We would all go to another friend's house for the day and come back, and the front door would open. At first, we thought the 2 puppies did it. They were 6 months old, black labs, and could be rambunctious. So we put the dogs outside when we left, and the door would be open when we got back. We called the police eventually, after about a week of it, and they set a patrol for the area. The door started staying shut, but the inside doors would all be reversed. Doors that were closed would be opened and vice versa. We were getting freaked out. A couple of times, Mom would swear she had heard somebody on the porch outside here, bedroom window. We were in a double-wide trailer with a porch that ran the length of the whole thing. Once, I thought I saw a small figure run past the living room window, but I did not hear footsteps, and there weren't any prints in the sand of grass around the porch. We all looked. This all came to a head that night, asleep on the couch. I bolted awake when the dogs growled. The dogs never growled. They were too scared to chase a frog. Innocent little puppies. The growling set me on edge, and I woke up, alarmed. And there was a dark man's shape trying to get through the front door. The dogs ran from the kitchen and tried to attack it. I'm a brave guy. I've run into burning buildings, jumped into a snake-infested creek to grab a kid who couldn't swim. But this, I screamed. The whole house came running. At first, they didn't believe me. The figure had disappeared. They thought the dogs were play fighting and just happened to hit the door. But the door was locked, every night, and I pointed that out. Suddenly, we knew we had a situation. We were all pagans to an extent, so we tried everything. Sage, salt, rituals, sigils, and still, strange happenings. The kid's sleepwalking was getting worse. I remember the dreams now. I don't want to go with them. They want me to go, but I don't want to go. We thought it was a joke at first and told him, well, hell, kid, don't go. Tell them to go away. And then, excitedly, a while later, he said, I told them to go and to leave me alone, and I kicked their butts, and they left. Robbie, who are you talking about? The other kids. Right after he kicked their butts, the stuff started happening with the doors. Flashback forward. We know we have a haunting, and none of the usual stuff is working. I decide to go all in. I'm going to trance out, Edgar Cayce style, and see if I can maybe contact the other side. It worked. There was a lady there, and she had a message for me. I know you think this kind of stuff is a joke, but you need to know that it isn't. Robbie is in danger. He was raped as a toddler by his grandfather, and now his grandfather's spirit has come back to destroy his soul. He will turn the boy into a monster. You are all in danger if he succeeds. I woke up. People were watching me, the mom and dad. I didn't want to sound weird, so I asked. Kat, her but not a real name, was Robbie molested as a child? Her eyes got huge. Dad, who was really stepdad, looked at her confused. Well, people used to tell me that my mom would abuse him, but I thought they were talking. I caught her with her hand down his diaper one day, though, and flipped out, but I never told anybody. Stepdad looks at Kat. Is that why your mom isn't allowed to babysit him? The situation had actually been a point of bother and inconvenience and source of several arguments between them in the last few months, when their work schedules had collided horribly. Kat grimaced. Yes. But it still didn't make any sense, because my vision said grandfather specifically. Unless... Kat, did your mom ever claim that her own father molested her? Her eyes almost popped out of her head when I asked. Yes, but did he ever babysit Robbie before he died? I knew her grandfather was dead. Her mother and her son were her only living relatives. No, he died before he was born. Still not making sense, but one more question. Did your mom ever claim that her father raped her? Kat was practically crying. These were family secrets, buried for years, coming from the mouth of somebody who certainly never had them told to him. Yes, but what does any of this have to do with haunting? The spirit in my dream last night told me that Robbie was molested as a baby by his grandfather, and that his grandfather's spirit was trying to corrupt Robbie's soul and turn him into a monster. If we go off of that, victimized children repeat this cycle by victimizing other children as adults. Then, in a sense, since your grandfather possibly molested your mom, and she likely did the same to him, then in a sense he started the cycle. He was the one who technically molested your son. His sin passed on to him. She was freaking out, full-blown panic attack, and the stepdad wasn't far behind. They both stood up alarmed. So what do? And we have to banish the old man's spirit and protect your sons. End the cycle, which we did with a series of specific pagan rituals. But that's my theory. The black-eyed kids were abused in real life, and then their souls were taken captive by the spirits of their tormentors to pass on torment to others, to feed off of happiness and replace it with pain and misery. If the Scandinavian tales are anything to go off of, and my own experience, I'm not going to say to invite them in, but perhaps a banishing ritual and warding charm could go a long way to preventing further harm. In mundane terms, I think those kids are already eternal slaves, but we should try to prevent harm in our own communities, watching out for abused kids, keeping harmful folks away from kids, taking certain nightmares and experiences seriously, and preventing what comes next. I think of all the mysteriously vanished people and kids who never turn up again, and I wonder. At first, I didn't think it could have been a black-eyed child, because I've never heard about them doing this before. My little brother, he's 6. He has some disabilities and disorders that cause him to be slow, not be able to hear properly, talk properly, use the potty properly, and he acts more like a toddler, but he's super smart, and he's my little man. One night, same as always, I was putting him to bed since I help out my parents, because I got 2 more siblings, and my mom works, so he usually goes to bed earlier, and I don't mind helping out with the kids. I was grabbing his blanket as he's babbling to himself. Not real words, but I still talk back as if he understood him. But all of a sudden, he goes quiet. So I turn to look at him, and I instantly feel a wave of complete terror and panic. Black-eyed children immediately flash in my mind, but then the thought is gone as I stare at him. He was looking at me, head tilting just a bit. His eyes were narrowed, and he had a tiny smirk on his face. He had never made this face before, nor have I felt so much fear by a face or him in general. I swallow the lump in my throat and say his name. As soon as his name leaves my lips, he shakes his head and face and goes back to babbling and looking at the bed within a couple of toys he had, as if nothing had happened. But the fear in that face didn't leave me at all that night, and I even felt uncomfortable being around him at that moment. But I told myself it was fine, and he's okay. And later that night, I told my parents. My mom thought he maybe had a seizure, but I immediately said no, because he hadn't had one in a few months now, and when he had seizures, he would fall wherever he is, get all tense, and is unresponsive for only a few seconds, and I knew this was not that. The next day, I texted my best friend because, at first, I thought he maybe had something in him, or something was in him, but I didn't think black-eyed child then. She told me to say prayers or something like that to find out, but she told me to be careful, because if something was in him, it could be in my two other siblings. But I didn't think, so I said they didn't act any different like he did. So anyway, I go up to my room with my siblings because, I don't know, I felt better saying a prayer up there than anywhere else for some reason. Now, just to mention, we aren't Catholic, but we do believe in God, but our parents don't, so we don't say grace or prayers often together. Anyway, during the prayer, my two siblings, not my youngest, kept laughing and talking because, like I said, we don't say prayers often. After the prayer, I tell them to say Amen, and they do, but not my youngest. I look at him, and again that fear and panic come back, but not as intense as before. I again swallow the lump in my throat and tell him to say Amen. He again shakes his head, smiles, and says Amen. After that, we go downstairs again, and I sit down and start to text my friend, when I notice my brother fall over, staring at the stairs we had just come from, and he starts scratching the floor. At first, I thought he was having a seizure, since when I said his name, he was unresponsive, but then I see him scratching, and I knew it wasn't that because he doesn't move when he has seizures. I quickly get on my knees beside him and ask, "Are you okay?" And I say his name over and over as I try to pick him up, but he was so tensed up that I couldn't get him up. But then all of a sudden, he reacts by throwing his arms around my neck and jumping into my lap. His hold is tight, and he's still staring at the stairs, but nothing is there. I try to calm him down, but it takes a few good minutes until he's back to normal, and that was the last of anything this ever happened. I actually didn't think this was a black-eyed kid until my mom said something. I thought said I never hear any stories like this, but she said maybe this was the first, and then I thought this had happened before, but no one knew it was a black-eyed kid. She agreed and told me I should write it about, and then maybe I'll find out from other people who've had this experience before too. Some backstory. My mom and I are both firm believers in all things paranormal. We know the stories of black-eyed children very well. Two kids with no emotion and black shadowy faces asking to come inside to use the phone, grab something to eat, or even ask you for just simple help. But if you help, bad things will happen. We are believers, but of course, we never thought either of us would actually encounter something like this. On Friday night, my mom got home late from work. There was a meeting about her work staying open during quarantine, so she didn't get to her house until around, I think about 7:30 or so. After pulling up in front of our house, she noticed a kid walking down our street. Now, my neighborhood doesn't really have younger kids at all, mainly just as teenagers, so my mom found this kid walking kind of strange. She even says to my dad, who was on the phone with her, and he jokes about the kid jumping on her car to scare her. You know, a typical dad trying to be funny. Sorta. Then just as fast as he was in front of her and moving to her, he was gone down the road and around the corner. 20 minutes go by, and before my mother hangs up the phone and steps out of the car, from behind her, she hears a very childlike, "Excuse me." After dropping her purse and screaming, she looks to the kid who notices it's the same boy who had disappeared around the corner almost a half hour before. Immediately, she told us she had this overwhelming feeling of pure fear throughout her entire body. She stares this boy down and notes that she can't see his face at all because of his hood and shadows from the street lamp behind him, and he has no shoes. It's 8 p.m. on a Friday night, after a stay-at-home order was just put out, and there was a little boy running around barefoot in just shorts and a hoodie. It was like he was trying to dress like a regular person, but just barely missed the mark. This little boy with his head down asked my mom if she had seen another little boy, and that he couldn't find him anywhere, meaning he was one of a pair. My mom, who has 3 kids and is one of the most genuinely kind people I know, had no urge whatsoever to help this child in front of her, or had any kind of sympathy for his situation. She just felt wrong, like there was something off and she needed to leave. In her head, her only thought was that she needed to run to our porch steps and get inside. However, what came out of her mouth was completely different. She tells this little boy, "No, I haven't, honey. Where did you lose him? I can help you look." Every part of her was telling her to leave and that this was wrong, but she offered to help. It's like the children knew that she thought something was off, though, because right at that second, another boy in the distance screamed. Of course, my mom jumped and her fear spiked, but the boy was eerily calm still. He looked at her and in a monotone voice said, "Oh, there he is," turned in the opposite direction and ran up our street and then turned left, which was the wrong way where the voice came from.